the Chicago Bears mock draft as well, right? We always like to do an AFC team and an NFC team here at Pro Football Network. And in one of the Pro Football Network's mock drafts for the Chicago Bears, we take a look. They don't have a first-round pick in this year's NFL draft. I mean, obviously
One
for
of
them,
8
the
teams.
capital. Yeah. What a wild turn of events. How many of these teams, do you think that one of these 8 teams might trade back in round 1? I don't think Chicago is one of those teams, but obviously for them to have to move up to try to get a Justin Fields, they had to give up some, future capital in that situation here. Now they find themselves without a round 1 pick. So how did they approach round number 2? Well, at round number 2, pick number 39, they go and they add a defensive tackle in Devontae Wyatt out of Georgia. And part of me is wondering, with the moves that you've seen, with obviously Matt Eberflus coming in as a defensive-minded head coach for the Chicago Bears team that just traded away in the offseason Khalil Mack, man, losing out on Akeem Hicks. Man, I feel like you got to address edge rusher first, but they're going to go with the defensive tackle here in Devontae Wyatt. Why Wyatt over an edge rusher here in round 2?
Yeah, I think, and at this point, you could go either one. I mean, I feel like this class especially, I think the deciding factor for me is that the class is a little bit deeper at edge rusher. So theoretically, not quite as deep at the interior line. So you look to get the best guy there first, and maybe in round 3 or round 4, you can still get a traits-heavy guy at edge who can develop into a contributor. I think right now for the Bears, we talk about interior line and edge. They kind of have a symbiotic relationship where they play off of one another. If the edge rusher pressures the tackle and makes him, get outside a little bit, that opens up a lane for a defensive tackle to stunt around his guy, so it frees up everyone else. It's a very team-oriented environment. And I think that getting Devontae Wyatt in there can relieve some pressure off of who you have at edge. Devontae Wyatt is the guy, I think, put him at 3 tech. Very, very productive player at the college level. Going to be a little bit older as a rookie, but the Bears, they didn't just lose Akeem Hicks. They lost Bilal Nichols, who was a very solid player as well.
Yeah.
They were going to get Larry Ogunjobi, and then that fell through because of failed medical. So you need talent there. And at this point, I think just take the best player available, at one of those positions of need. For me, that's Devontae Wyatt. Explosive, heavy-handed, super violent with his movements, and he's got great lateral agility as well. He showed it at the Senior Bowl. He should not be able to move the way he does for being 6'3", over 300 pounds. So the dude is dense, he is physical, very athletic, and he can be an impact pass rusher very, very early on in his NFL career. So I think right here, this fit is very good, and it helps your edge rushers, frees them up a little bit too, which is always nice.
I mean, the NFL draft is all about addressing needs on your roster, but also trying to maximize as much potential upside as possible. Right here in round 2, their second pick of the round in a trade they got from the Los Angeles Chargers, you've got them addressing wide receiver, which is going to be a critical need for the Chicago Bears this year. This one is with George Pickens, the wide receiver out of Georgia. He's a little bit of a contentious pick, I know, in some areas, because if prior to the ACL injury, he could have been a top 3 wide receiver off the board. He's a bit wiry, don't get me wrong, just over 6'3", just under a little bit under 200 pounds. Don't question his toughness. So go ask Daxton Hill about his toughness. Go back to watch that college championship game against Michigan. We kind of know what that is. To me, he's a guy who just excels away from his body with catches. His route running is great. He's got a little bit of polish, but what do you think about George Pickens? It's a guy who's just sliding a little bit too far in drafts, and is the upside someone this guy could absolutely ascend to be that number 1 right there alongside Darnell Mooney for the Bears.
Yeah, the thing with this wide receiver class is there's so many guys in that range. It's going to be really interesting to see where they stack up, because I feel like every team is going to have a different preference. But you look at George Pickens, and I'm a little uncertain with him because, after he came back from the ACL, he wasn't playing all the time. He didn't show the same suddenness and twitch that he showed before it. Now, that doesn't mean he doesn't have it, but I'm a little concerned about how it's going to project long term. Now, he tested at the combine, ran in the 4.4s at 6'3", 195, which we'd love to see. He's got that vertical speed where he'd pressure you, get downfield, and then when the ball's in the air, we've seen it, the circus catches, he can make
body control.
Exactly, body control, but length too, being able to outreach the other defensive back is crucial. This guy's got the toughness, the playmaking ability, and he showed route running promise before that ACL injury. Again, I was very impressed with the twitch and suddenness that I saw, the hip sync. He had that. I'm just the thing that worries me is whether he can get back to that 100%. That's the thing that he's going to have to answer. But if he can do that, the talent is undeniable. And, he does get a little overzealous with that toughness, with that physicality. But I love a guy who has that edge, especially wide receiver. You look at wide receiver versus cornerback, it's such a dynamic battle, and it's one-on-one. You're on an island. You got to beat your guy. And, if you're passive, maybe the other guy, knocks you in the jaw just enough where you're kind of out of your game, right? So I think George Pickens having that alpha mentality, on top of the talent that he has, that's enough for me to say maybe he's worth this pick. But again, the medicals are a question for me. So I want that answered, but the talent is undeniable.
Well, let's take a look at the rest of the Chicago Bears and Pro Football Network's latest mock draft here. Round 3, pick 71, Martin Emerson, cornerback out of Mississippi State. And cornerback depth is so critical in today's National Football League. Now, Devontae Adams is out of the division, but you still have to worry about the Minnesota Vikings and Justin Jefferson, Adam Thielen. So Emerson's going to be one of those guys that's going to come in. Then you add an edge rusher a little bit later on, and Josh Paschal out of Kentucky. I don't know what I was reading right there. Sorry about that. Chris Paul, you
Words
all see
are
the
hard.
offensive tackle. I know, seriously. Chris Paul, offensive tackle out of Tulsa. We talked about him earlier. Not the point god, but he is one of those additional guys that you got to add there. And especially offensive tackle for Chicago, it's going to be super critical for them to find a guy there. I'm surprised they're actually not taking an offensive tackle in one of the later like one of the beginning parts of the NFL draft in this mock. And then you add in Josh Johnson. So an interesting mock draft on the Chicago Bears side, and some questions that I have too. It is going to be a critical year here for Justin Fields and for Luke Getsy, who's going to be a first-time offensive coordinator here with this organization. And you look at the pieces that are around Justin Fields right now, I'm not too optimistic. Look, you have Cole Kmet at tight end, which I think will be very solid for him.
Yeah.
We talk about Darnell Mooney, who's got that speed threat that obviously you can use there. But it's like outside of that, if they do add in George Pickens, I like that add up there. However, is that enough for them to be able to compete inside this NFC North division? I feel like it's still not enough. I still think that there's an argument that Chicago, they need to address offensive tackle more than anything else here. And obviously, I think a lot of it's going to be contingent upon the mindset of Matt Eberflus, who is a defensive-minded head coach, who, in my opinion, Ryan Poles, as a new first-time GM as well, decided to go with a defensive-minded head coach when you have a young offensive quarterback that needs molding. Can Luke Getsy be that guy there for Justin Fields? I mean, it's a huge gamble here for Chicago, not going with any offensive tackles.
Yeah, that's the decision to make when you are Chicago. When you traded some of your picks, you don't have as many draft capital, so you really need to be, selective with what you're going to do. And it's I wish that the Ryan Bates signing would have pulled through, because that would have helped him out a lot. But then the Bills were able to match the offer and he went back to Buffalo, right? So sometimes that happens. The Bears have had a couple hard breaks in this free agency period, and it puts the pressure on them just enough, even more in the NFL draft to make the right decisions. One thing about Ryan Poles, he's an OL guy, all right? He was at OL Masterminds. He knows his stuff when it comes to that, when it comes to trench play. So looking for him to maybe get some high-level gems, maybe late in the draft, maybe pinpoint those guys. We'll see if he can do that. But I think if you're the Bears, because you don't have that round 1 pick and because you don't have as much capital as other teams, you're really going to need to try and search for those guys. Try and get those high-value additions, because you just don't have the luxury of taking the talent at the top.